Hey, Shane.
Sir.
You have an American flag?
In the other building.
Not in this building, sir.
Oh, we gotta remedy that.
You need to fix that.
Maybe we can get one up on screen. I know it gets you for Christmas.
We're finding a few things as the morning goes on that we need to take care of. So.
I don't think you can search it up on Google. From the distribution center down the street. I'm gonna drop it off at the room. I am.
I guess probably is best way to say it.
The 280 south to 95.
Yeah, that was close. That was the easy part.
Yeah. So we just get through
It
those.
was at the railroad crossing.
Bonjour, I'm sorry. Oh, good morning. Good morning. The other language slips out sometimes. Good morning to each of you. Welcome. And it's a pleasure to be here at this wonderful building, this edifice here. And I was telling my colleague, Ms. Carol, that he kept pressing me, so we're here. And so it's a pleasure to be here. This is time for, we haven't done this in a while. Let's go around very quickly and do a little introduction, okay? So I can that in.
Shane Mann, VDOT Richmond District.
Steve Yap, Henrico County Manager's Office.
John Hodges, Town of Ashland. David Williams, Powhatan County.
Patricia Page, Newton County.
Cynthia Newville, City of Richmond.
Kevin Carroll, Chesapeake County.
Frank Thornton, Michael County.
Eric Gregory, Legal Counsel.
Nova Peterson, Hanover County.
Neil Spoonhauer, Goodson County.
Chad Parsons, Planner VA.
Good morning, Martha Heater, Plan RVA.
And you know, to this auspicious group staff, it's important. We have other staff people like identify themselves. Okay. Yeah. Also, we have our commissioners online. Okay.
Carlos, can you hear us?
Yeah, Carlos Brown, CTB.
Okay. Other members online.
Jennifer Mitchell, DRPT. Good morning, Joy Dean, RMTA.
Good morning, we're in the 70th House District.
Good morning, Jennifer McClellan, 9th Senate District.
Good morning, Julie Tim, GRTC.
Everyone. At this time, we'll have the flag put up and we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. If you be so kind.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice for all.
Okay, again, members, each of you is understand what we have, document with the statement regarding virtual meetings. We want to do that. So this time I call for roll call vote. Secretary.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, thank you. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Here.
Charles City County, Mr. Kodak. Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Here.
Richmond County, Mr. Spoonhouse.
Happy to be here.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton. Newton County, Ms. Page.
Here.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Here.
City of Richmond, Dr. Newville.
Here.
Virginia House of Delegates, Delegate McQuinn,
Here.
Senate of Virginia, Senator McClellan,
Here.
Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown,
Here.
RPT, Ms. Mitchell,
Here.
Mr. Mann,
Here.
URTC, Ms. Tim,
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Dean.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. All right. Well, now we go to administration, A1. Are there any considerations or amendments of actions for meeting with agenda anyone? If not, the chair has one. Good morning, everyone. We move now to the administration section of the agenda. And the first item is consideration of amendments to action meetings agenda. So before I open up discussion to the full authority, I have one change I'd like to make in my discretion as chair pursuant to Article 4, Section Q2 of the bylaws. I'm going to reorder the agenda so that the CVTA Technical Advisory Committee update comes after the chairman's report in order to address an item in that update before receiving the Finance Committee update. With that change, I will now call for any other changes in the agenda. Hearing none, then I will now entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Are there any questions? Motion has been properly made and second. We have to do a roll call vote for this. Okay, will the voice vote, those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it, and we will add that to our agenda. Item will be open public comment period. Secretary, do you have anyone that you know of? Okay, this is where I normally would say something. I would just, I'll just wait till I get to Chairman's report. So here again. Okay. We're gonna help myself. All right, let's go to item A2, approval of the agenda. And the action requested is, we need a motion on that. The minutes. Yeah, the meeting minutes.
Move for approval, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Motion has been made from the second, or another voice. Do one for this, or another. Okay, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
And opposed? As have it, and the minutes are approved. Okay. You know, I'm so excited, Mr. Carroll, being this new building. I just can't contain myself.
Something in the coffee.
Okay, could be. Okay. Open public comment period, I heard none, okay. Chairman, report, I guess the only thing I want to say is, again, I'm happy I took Mr. Carroll up on coming here, and I also would like to say thank you to each of you as commissioners. I'm a thank you person. And I just want to say thank you. And look where you came. A lot of you came from great distances. And we're here in a wonderful edifice. So I just want to make certain that we let you know that it's a pleasure to be here. And you can give us additional information on this as we move on. Okay. All right. Okay, at this time then, we have the CBTA Technical Advisory Committee update. Mr. Todd Ewell.
Morning, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So This item under C6A certification reporting, member spending plans. This is an update from the authority members at the request of the Technical Advisory Committee. The CVTA TAC representatives discussed the certification reporting cycle and how annual reporting can be tracked to ensure compliance with legislative requirements. The TAC entertained quarterly updates to its FY21 local allocation plan. This is the listing of anticipated local expenditures and transportation needs. Members were encouraged to submit updates to staff as soon as possible following the meeting. In a similar discussion, TAC members introduced the FY22 local allocation plan and were encouraged to get projects submitted to staff in advance of the June meeting so that a FY22 plan could be put on the agenda for approval in June. The year-end closeout of the local allocation plan is a legal instrument that would be signed by the chief elected officer of each member government that certifies local CVTA revenues for the preceding year were expended solely for transportation purposes. Next steps include bringing the draft FY22 local allocation plan to the CBTA TAC at its June meeting, incorporating suggested changes and presenting to the full CBTA for approval in June. In addition, TAC members will work internally to ensure the annual certification is submitted back to staff for compilation. Item 6, C6B, regional project prioritization. This item is included as an update for authority members at the request of the Technical Advisory Committee. The project prioritization subcommittee met on April 30th. And our continued efforts on developing a process for identifying key regionally significant projects to be funded through the 35% regional fund of the CVTA. Key points that the subcommittee is focused on include the following: identification of truly regional projects. The committee is setting thresholds for projects to qualify through data like average daily traffic, type of facility, and functional classification in the VDOT system. Development of data-driven analysis using RRTPO prioritization tools as a foundation for project assessment. Potential projects will be tested by staff, and the resulting scores will be useful in determining how to rank and prioritize the projects. And also evaluating sample projects through the RRTPO tool to ensure agreement with CBTA goals and qualifications. Next steps include evaluating a sample set of projects through RRTPO priority model, and then deciding if additional changes or adjustments should be made to develop CVTA priorities. Item C6C, Transit Service Governance Report. CVTA staff and the Transit Service Governance Subcommittee continue to work with the consultant team to develop the report due by the end of June. So we're getting on a tight timeline. The consultant has completed stakeholder interviews, peer agency evaluations, and developed a strategic assessment and benchmarking of CVTA compared to Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and HR TAC, and is preparing options for TRTC governance strategies. The report is slated for review and recommendation by the TAC at the June 14th TAC meeting and planned for presentation for approval by CVTA at its June 25th meeting. That's the end of my report, Mr. Chair. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, the chair has comments. So first, are there any questions for Mr. Ewer and his report?
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you for your report, Mr. Ure. I know you guys are working extremely hard on this. You mentioned things like setting requirements and thresholds for some of the reporting. What is the process? I know we're running through models and different methodologies. What is going to be the process for implementing it? I.e., when will they come to this board?
You're referring to the regional prioritization process?
Yes.
So that group is meeting generally bi-weekly. And we're working closely with Chet and his staff on the kind of test modeling of the sample set of projects. I will defer to Chet as far as how that process is going, but that's kind of the step we're waiting on to move forward to kind of testing the full universe of projects and developing an application process. So discussion at the subcommittee level, I think our goal is probably sometime around August as a target goal, with the possibility it may run slightly longer depending on how the test modeling works. I'll defer to Chet if he has any further clarification on that timeline.
That's correct. Staff is taking our guidance from the committee, and they're scheduled to meet now. The next meeting is next Friday, the 4th. And I think that'll be a good pivotal meeting to get a good grip on what additional tools or analysis needs to happen. The TPO process is proceeding smoothly, and we expect to have a full list of project scoring in the next few weeks to be released for public review. And I mean, at that point, tax staff and everybody else will have had a chance to look at it. And I think the decision that needs to be made between now and I'll say August is, are there additional measures that the CVTA would like to take to further refine that the scoring or the project list or the priorities and what direction the CVTA would like to go above and beyond what the TPO is developing.
Okay, so we're hearing things like, when I'm watching the meetings, I'm seeing things like road thresholds and minimums. When will that come to this? Will that come to this body to weigh in on those thresholds and minimums and the different scoring methodologies?
Yes, absolutely. It'll come to this body before any decisions are made. Right now, I think the TAC is taking the lead on coming up with those recommendations, but the recommendations will certainly come back to you before anything is decided.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for the.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, a follow-up question. So if I understand, Chet, you're going to be coming back to this body with the criteria that's going to be used for the prioritization?
You said that very well. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
The process will come first, and then the priorities will come.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yes.
Thank you. That's very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One point, I think that, just to clarify that once the criteria is established, you'll be bringing it for us to approve.
Correct.
So there'll still be a review process beyond that by the board members, determine if we're happy with what's been developed and if we believe it's going to serve what we need for the little bit.
Excellent.
Just clarification.
And Mr. Chairman, this is
Going
Carl.
all the time, this board, make sure we have transparency. That's really important.
I think Mr. Brown had a question.
Ms.
Yeah, I
Brown,
just to clarify again the timing of that. So is that the June meeting that we expect that to happen, or August? Or a couple of different months there. When do we expect to actually have that report delivered to us?
August.
August.
Yes, the process itself.
So the process will be August. So as far as getting to a point where we actually have a prioritization of projects or even open the application process, then we're not anticipating that happening until when? What's the outside date on that?
Our best guess is a month or two after that process is approved.
So in theory, by the end of 21, we actually might have our first recommended funding scenario of prioritized projects. Is that the goal, or am I off on that?
Absolutely. I would hope before then.
Okay, all right.
And Mr. Chair, if I could add on to that response. So at the subcommittee and the TAC level, each of the localities has been asked to kind of submit a non-binding list of regional priority projects that locality feels should potentially move forward in the application process. And those projects range from regional level projects on the interstates to the Fall Line Trail to major projects within jurisdictions. And out of that list of sub-list of projects, that's kind of the test project list that Chet and his staff are working on to run through the draft prioritization process to kind of get a feel for how they score out. So I think once we get a process that everybody's comfortable with to bring back to the full body, things should be able to move pretty quickly because we're already sort of refining that universe of projects list down to a reasonable level.
One more thought, Mr. Chairman, and this is for a suggestion, which I'd like to hear people's feedback. When we developed the SMART scale process, in order to make sure that all the board members were fully educated and up to speed, the staff of VDOT did kind of a one-on-one or 2-by-1 meetings with the board members, so we could take a deep dive outside of the board meeting. And I understand the importance of trying to have efficient boards, and because of the complexity of all this, I would recommend that staff anticipate having to do that with each individual commissioner, such that when we do finally get that prioritization process, all of the board members have been briefed and educated, and when the report comes to the broader board, we won't have to take commission meeting time to go through some of the nuances. If that's a suggestion for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. We'll take down that advisement. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Buell, for that report. We've all had many conversations about benefits of the Fall Line Trail. And we're in a good position now to take next steps. As chair, I'm calling for a motion to take the following 3 actions. First, to direct CVTA staff to draft letters on behalf of the CVTA to A, Secretary of Transportation and the CTV, indicating CVTA's commitment to providing the required match for the consensus scenario round 4 smart scale allocations directed to additional Fall Line Trail projects. And B, federal representatives indicating the CTV's commitment to making the completion of the trail a regional priority. Second, to direct the CBTA Technical Advisory Committee, TAC, to work with VDOT and CBTA staff to establish a budget, timeline, cash flow, and project management resources to fully fund and complete all sections of the Fall Line Trail located within the CVTA number of localities that do not have other committed funding sources. And report back to the Finance Committee as well as to the full authority by their August 2021 meetings. Third, to direct the Technical Advisory Committee and CVTA staff to coordinate with the 4 member localities that do not directly benefit from the Fall Line Trail to define their regional priority project needs and develop a draft funding plan for each of those projects. That was right bunch. Now, do I hear a motion to adopt these 3 items?
Mr. Chair.
Question.
So for me, in layman's terms, what are you asking us to do? I mean, we just said that we're gonna have a structure for projects that are coming back to us in August. And now we're asking to take action on the project?
What we're really saying is we're sending this back to one of the groups to take a look at things. We've been talking about the Fall Line project, okay? And the Fall Line project, that is efficacious to 5 of the 9 localities. There are 4 that are not included in that. And we listen to what we said very carefully. This is an opportunity now for us to have more equity. Not only can we do, because I think the CBTA needs a project. And so the Fall Line project could be that project. And what we also trying to do to show equity is we're giving the 4 other localities an opportunity to get together to decide and to develop a plan on their own. And when you think about it, this is consistent. You've heard me say, let's try to have more flexibility when it comes to some of the things that we're doing.
Okay, so I hear every meeting that we are a team and a family. But now we got some localities that has already made up their minds about a project. And then you're gonna give other localities the opportunity to get our project together. Is that how I'm hearing this?
That may be how you're hearing it, but that was, maybe I articulated badly. What I am saying, is we've always talked about family.
Absolutely.
And so, but what we are saying now is, let's also have a project,
Mhm.
okay? And I would hope that, you know, that it's not just for the the 5 members,
Mhm.
but all the members. But in addition to that, all that, we're also saying, we're taking into consideration that, okay, what about those other 4 localities? In this project, you might think there's nothing for them, but that's not the case. What we're saying then, for the whole team, we got this big project we're going to try to do as a family. Then we also want to look out for the family members by saying, let the other members give us a better idea of what they would like to have, and develop it. Nobody telling them what to do. I think that could be a good direction. Am I wrong?
So, Mr.
I
Chair,
don't know what project that Powhatan could do that would, excuse me for using you, Mr. Williams,
Please.
that would enhance New Kenner Charles City. Or what could y'all do?
Let me, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
I think the question for us is, going right to Ms. Page's point, is this going to be a project among the 4 smaller jurisdictions, or will each of these small jurisdictions, rural jurisdictions, have the opportunity to bring forward a project within their jurisdiction? I think that's what we're trying to get at. I hope it's the latter. I hope it's the flexibility that New Kent will have the opportunity to do a project, and New Kent, Powhatan will be able to take those proportional monies out of the 35% that's going to the Fall Line Trail and be able to use that for a project in Powhatan. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Vice Chair, you want to add to that?
I see Mr. Casey shaking his head up there,
Okay.
so I must be getting close.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think what, and we talked about this, unfortunately, you and I haven't had a chance to talk to the person yet. I think all of us have had different conversations with one another, that there are projects, which is why we didn't limit this to the same restrictions that the other DPO borders had. So you may have a project on a Western Powhatan that you need to fund, but out of your 50%, it may not be enough money to do it.
That's right.
And so we want to make sure, in fairness, when we look at the first opportunity to use some of these funds, is that every locality gets touched. And so you may have something that you need funds for that the CVTA could help out of the 35%. You may have something that you need help with. Usually may have something, and so that's kind of what the theory is, to make sure that of those, that 35% funds, that there may be other projects that there could be a match for to help.
So I think that I don't have enough information, because do we have an estimate of how much the Fall Line project is, the cost of that? Do we have an estimated cost of that? And if you have an estimated cost of that, then out of the 35% that's left, what's left for the other 4 or the smaller jurisdictions?
Ms. Page, one of the things that we're trying to do as these groups get together, they're going to find out what that funding data is. We don't have that today.
Okay. I just want to be clear.
All right, no.
When I go home, I want to be.
Right. I want there to be clarity.
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Chairman, as I understand, you're going to be getting at those numbers.
Yes.
Your motion.
Yes.
And then, once we get at those costs, those numbers, then we're going to be looking at what we have with the 35%. And then we're going to be doing some type of percentage basis in terms of where the 35% came from.
It's actually, it's based on what to what your jurisdiction has paid in.
Right, so that's the equity part of it. And is my understanding that, you know, we will be getting something back. So I'm in support of that. And I would like to thank you for that because that does get at the issue of equity. So, and it also gives us the opportunity to do a regional project as an authority that I believe that will, you know, give us the recognition that we deserve in terms of what we're trying to accomplish as an authority. So I think it's a win-win in our project for bringing us home.
And so, Mr. Chair, I have to tell you that I have not had the opportunity to meet with the vice chair. And so if I had, then I wouldn't have raised the questions that I raised. But I look forward to our conversation, so.
And
I'm clear.
may I say this too, Ms. Page, you bring up a good point there. I was always taught no question is silly or out of place. So this is the first time that we present that to you. And you would have been remiss if you didn't ask your question. So we appreciate that. Very important. Thank you. Mr. Spoonhour?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I echo my colleague's sentiments. The thing that I want to make sure that we're understanding is that, take for example, Goshen County, we were asked to submit projects for the 35%, not knowing what the criteria were. One of them that's floating around is that there's a 20,000 per day vehicle threshold for us to meet. Off the top of my head, that means we have 2 roads that will be qualified for the regional projects. I do like the fact that some of the proposal that some of the money is going to be coming back to us, but not knowing what criteria are going to be used. Is it going to be the 50, just like the 50%, or is it going to fall under some other criteria that we don't even know exists right now?
Let me let Mr. Gregory address the conversation.
And that, just a follow-up is, again, back to Mrs. Page's original question is, we've got a lot of people working on a process for prioritization that we're just putting aside for now and just saying, okay, but we're just going to do this instead of having that process.
Mr. Chairman, this is Carlos.
Mr. Brown, Mr. Gregory has the floor right now.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Brown, one quick comment, just, I understand there may be some consternation or concern about maybe putting the cart before the horse with trying to figure out what the prioritization process is going to be, and now this sort of proposal that's on the floor, in light of Mr. Yore's presentation from TAC. And I'll just point out that the statute, the CVTA statute provides that the authority shall develop a prioritization process based on an objective and quantifiable analysis that considers the benefits of projects relative to their cost. Only projects evaluated using such process may be funded pursuant to the subdivision D1, which is the 35% regional funds, right? So the TAC is developing that prioritization process based upon the objective and quantifiable criteria that's required. That is coming forward. You all will have input on that process before. That does not mean that this, what Mr. Chairman is proposing, can't also be acted upon today to express the support of the authority for a regional project of this sort. Nothing is being funded yet, so you're still in compliance with that code section. I don't find anything problematic about this process right now with regard to the motion that's been proposed. It certainly can be in compliance with the code section. And once that prioritization process is developed and the projects are screened through that process, there's no reason why the authority can't make a decision to fund project A, B, or C, whether it's the Fall Line Trail or whether it's one of the projects in Goochland or Powhatan, based upon that criteria in conjunction with what's being proposed by the chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think I can add some clarification from Mr. Spoonhour's question. the criteria that's being developed, for the prioritization, that's for the 35%. Okay, now the 50% that you get to keep, you don't have any prioritization scoring. That's up to you, as long as you're spending it according to the Code of Virginia for transportation. Is that correct, Mr. Gregg?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So additionally, the money that would be coming back that's not going to be used as the 35%, your proportional share on the Fall Line Trail, that money would not have to meet the prioritization scoring as well. That would be, as Mr. Carroll said, that would be able to be used to supplement projects from your 50% that you would like to see funded in your jurisdiction. Is that correct, Mr. Gregg?
I believe so.
I'm
Mr.
not.
Chair.
That's my, I think that's the answer that concerns me. I believe so. So we have something, so as late as last evening around 8 o'clock, I was in conversations sort of about this because we've been hearing through the grapevine that this was in the works, sort of behind the scenes with some folks. I heard 3 different explanations of how it was going to work. So now we're being asked to vote on something that is, I believe so. I believe that's how it's going to come back. It doesn't seem like how we want to conduct our business.
So if I understand you, sir, you would like to have seen something advanced in writing that explained it.
Yes, well, yeah, I would think so. I'm pretty new at this, but I would think it doesn't show up in the agenda or.
Because of the questions that are now being, brought up.
Yes, sir.
Here at this meeting, and as opposed to having something in writing that explained this more fully.
Yes, sir.
Brown, yeah, so-
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, we're saying that we're trying, the TAC is saying that they're setting criterias and prioritization for projects, but now we have a project, so what is the criteria for this project? And so it's like, so that, I guess that's where my confusion became, and we haven't even said it, then how can we already have a project? So what was the criteria for this project?
If I may.
And I'm not against the fall line.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask.
If I may, Mr. Brown.
Yeah.
Mr. Brown had
I think maybe we need to clarify again. I know that you read your motion, but we probably need to have you interpret exactly what you're seeking. I think we all get the fact that, well, are we asking staff simply to come back to us? Are we to provide us the detail on how we might execute the Fall Line Trail in conjunction with exploring opportunities with the other jurisdictions? I don't think you're asking us to approve the funding. I think you're asking staff to, but can you go back over your motion? Because again, I don't know that all of us, I don't know that I captured it all because there was a 3-part motion. So
I apologize if I read it too fast. So, okay. First, to direct CVTA staff to draft letters on behalf of the CVTA to the Secretary of Transportation and CTB indicating CVT's commitment to providing the required match for the consensus scenario round 4 smart scale allocations directed to additional Fall Line Trail projects. And B, federal representatives indicating the CBT's commitment to making the completion of the trail a regional priority.
okay, can I interrupt you, just to break it down to the, again, I think this will be helpful. So to provide some context to the other board members, just maybe what's in play here, is at the May CTB meeting, I needed to submit a CTB funded scenario. And there was an opportunity for me to reallocate about $50 or so million in the Richmond District Smart Scale allocation to support the Fall Line Trail. However, to do that, there was also a need for an additional $14 million commitment that I asked for the respective jurisdictions to say that they would react to. And again, it's in the sausage making. It didn't really matter where the 14 million came from, but essentially, I proposed to bring about $3 of additional smart scale dollars for every $1 additional dollar of local dollars that would be funded in connection with this project. So I get, my sense is that this letter, Ms. Page, Mr. Spoonhour, is really directed to me, to the board, to say that we're going to figure out how to fund that additional 14 million. I think the second part of what I believe the chairman is asking for is simply a letter of support that the CVTA believes that the Fall Line Trail is a priority and will seek to prioritize that at the point in which it does approve or decide upon the funding allocation for the regional funds. Now, that is not predetermining the amount, the scope, the scale, but I think it is to send a message, I believe directed really to me, Mr. Chairman, that the CVTA is committed. So I think what you're asking is simple. Well, I think what the chairman is asking for is simply letters of support that the trail is valued, is important, and I can receive that in a nondescript way or a more descriptive way to the degree that makes folks comfortable. But I think, Mr. Chairman, you're not really asking for approval of funding or allocation of funds. You're simply asking for the board to be willing to approve the staff submitting a letter saying that the Fall Line Trail is important to the region. Is that a fair summary?
Well articulated.
So I don't know if I can maybe provide some clarification. So I do have some context around maybe where this came from.
I'll defer to Mr. Brown. My comment briefly was that the Fall Line Trail is a project that's been through the VDOT process, and we have an opportunity to have a project of significant scale done early in the process to show that this organization can use the money that we've been given in an appropriate way to address a significant regional project.
Someone else, is that Senator had a comment?
Mr. Chair, Delegate McQuinn, I am not sure who suggested that there will be something in writing, but I think that would be appropriate with all of the conversation around this. I think that we still need much, and thank you, Mr. Brown, but I think we still need some level of clarity around this. And when there's a motion on the floor as proposed by the chairman, I just think that it would be probably much more beneficial to everyone, especially those who are asking questions and trying to better understand in terms of the criteria that set this up and how it is prioritized in comparison to other things that may have been submitted. So I just think that I really think at this point, we probably do need something in writing so that we could have an opportunity to look at it from that perspective.
Again, I think what I asked for is in congruence with what you're saying, because we're asking the group to draft the statement.
Yes.
Yes.
I think one thing that'll help too with this, I know we're looking not just at the Fall Line, but we're also looking at the full family, as you have referred to our region often. I think it's important to know that a regional project does not necessarily have to be in more than one jurisdiction. I can assure you that I have spent plenty of dollars in every jurisdiction that's in this in the CVTA, because there are things in every jurisdiction that I want to go to, and I go to and visit. I know Powhatan has had, I believe, a long-term project trying to do some stuff at the park
on the river. That park is used by more than Powhatan residents. It's used by people from Richland, from Chesterfield, Hanover, what have you. So I do see these as regional benefits, even though they might be in one jurisdiction. And so I think it's important that we look at projects, not just from the eye that it has to be several jurisdictions, but what happens in any one of our jurisdictions can be a benefit to all of our jurisdictions.
Okay, other comments? I want the commission to know that a premise that we started off with, I think has been articulated already, is that we are in the process of foundation. And so we're trying to put the blocks in the right place. We're not doing it in a rapid way. We want to make sure that it's done appropriately and also with transparency. So I want to know, we still talk about family, keeping family and respecting each member of the family together. And when one member of the family improves, all it should count all family members there. So enough of that metaphor. So we're like a motion. We're like a second on this motion I put forth.
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion, like, speak to the motion. If you got a second.
I'll second the motion.
It would be helpful if we could actually distribute copies of the motion to everybody, I think, right? Do you have it?
Could we distribute copies of the motion? I think that'll help be efficacious for most of you. You're getting ready to get a copy of the motion.
Now, should we take a small break and let people have a chance to read it?
Let's take a 3-minute break so you have a chance to do that.
Mr. Chair, I will, during that break, I'll try and put the motion on the screen as well for everybody at home.
Okay, before I take the break, we'll put the motion also on the screen. We'll try.
Motion's on the floor, we'll just stand by.
Okay.
Entertainment options. Make it out to cash.
It's still gonna have to be reviewed later. So that's what the second.
Sure.
I remember.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
I
can find it.
Yeah. Yeah, the language doesn't change.
And we're still. There's still things that are.
This is the first thing.
Yeah, it just seems like.
There's the new project.
It doesn't mean that this is what's going to end up being funded. It basically gives us an opportunity
Yeah, it is way less stressful. Yes, when I'm in the office.
So I could say, have a look at it, things
Where I am.
just do something. As we talked about.
Get benefited again.
We can solve that. Yeah, it's the whole driving.
I'm just trying to show.
We got a fair number.
Our
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to stand by my previous comments and thank you for your efforts and coming forward with something I believe is really an equitable proposal, you know, for the family. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I'm just wanting to, and maybe it would be helpful, there are 4 actions invited in this statement, and so we don't have to do a separate vote on each item. Is that correct? But there are 4 components. The letter, it's the statement of priority, it's then directing staff. So it's trying to do it all together.
Yes, ma'am.
Other questions, anyone?
Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to the vote. If I could speak to the vote.
Please.
I think we've all want to, I think it was Mr. Williams, actually said, put something forward to the community to show just a great work that I think this board has done over the last year, and looking at how we can best spend or propose to spend. This is really a placeholder, so to speak. The tax dollars that we've been entrusted to spend. And I think it's also important, as the chair has said, to make sure that if we end up funding this project, and this is really a placeholder, hopefully to try and get the funds, as Mr. Brown has talked about, and some other funds, that we also are equitable to the other jurisdictions who may have other projects that they need to get done as well. And I think it's a good regional way as a first start to have a project which is significant, but also return some funds to the localities so that they can also work on some of their projects as well. And I would like to see, me personally, I would like to see that those percentages look, in my personal opinion, something like what those jurisdictions have actually contributed to that 35%. So that that would be significant for the smaller jurisdictions in some of the transportation. So we all know that all of our jurisdictions have significant transportation needs, every single one of us, which is why I think this organization was created in the first place, to try and help with that. I think it's why the numbers were allocated the way they were, between 50, 35, 15. And I can tell you that I've been so impressed to be part of this organization and meet everybody and get to know everybody and work closely as we have on this. And so I think this is a good first step. And certainly it will still allow moving forward for the Technical Advisory Committee to work on their prioritization process. And also this motion also allows for us to get an idea, quite frankly, on what a cost would look like, what a timeline would look like, how the cash flow would work, and even if we can actually have someone as a project management, such as VDOT, who, if I remember correctly, did the cap to cap. And so it's really what I think what the chairman's proposing, and that's all my comments. So.
Any other discussion? This time we're calling the clerk to do a roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Wilson County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Aye.
Franklin County, Ms. Page.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Dr. Newville.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
CTV, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think now we go to the finance committee report.
I guess so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Stoney, the chairman of the Finance Committee, is not able to be with us today, so as Vice Chairman, I'll be filling in for him on the report. This should be much simpler than our last item on the agenda. We did have a very active committee meeting here and discussing several items. We have both the financial activities report. We did discuss the memorandum of understanding with the with Plan RVA for the coming year. We discussed the memorandum of agreements for the jurisdictions. And at the same time, we also spoke to future needs of CVTA, both in terms of people and in terms of financing and how things are going to be done. We did have, so I'll go through these one item at a time. We'll start with the financial activities report, which is in everybody's agenda for information. But I will turn this over to Martha to discuss in more detail and see if there's any questions on the financial activities. Martha.
Thank you. As Mr. Peterson said, you can refer to page 9 of your packet. This is the financial activities report that was presented to the Finance Committee at their May meeting. As a reminder, the activities are reported on a monthly basis, and they currently cover the revenues attributed through February. So just in summary, the total receipts have been $78 million, $78,615,217. The operating fund, of course, set aside at $500,000, leaves the regional fund at $27,340,326. The distribution to the GRTC was $11,717,000, leaving having the total transfers there being at $39,557, and then the distribution sum to $39,057,000 in total to all of the distribution. So the accounts and funds, as it were, have all been cleared from the deposits from VDOT and distributions to the appropriate funds. And you can see that in the section below. Obviously, the operating fund has the remaining balance that has not yet been invoiced. I will update to share with you that since the end of February, the third quarter invoice for the operating fund has been submitted, and that was at $61,000. So that will be reflected on next month's report. The local distributions have been cleared. The regional distributions obviously are sitting in the regional distribution fund, and the GRTC fund has been cleared as well. All distributions made to GRTC. I'll just say with thanks to the team at Chesterfield County and the city of Richmond, as you know, through the MOUs that we have with them for fiscal agents, the staff at Chesterfield County has been managing these funds and producing the documentation. And obviously we want to say thanks to them for their work.
Any questions from anyone? That was for information.
No questions from the state. I'll take it as the next item that is really going to go back to her as well, is the memorandum of understanding. The Plan RVA for the 7 years was discussed by the Finance Committee with changes that were in here and reviewed, I believe, by all the jurisdictions. And would you give a recap of that memorandum of understanding, Cedar?
Yes, sir. Thank you. At the April Finance Committee meeting, we talked through the concept of an extension or renewal of the current fiscal year agreement through the end of fiscal year 2022. And then at the May Finance Committee meeting, members were able to review a marked up copy that you have here in your packet. The base of the MOU was the agreement for this current fiscal year, and then we revised it appropriately to reflect the needs and recommended services to be provided by Plan RVA for the upcoming fiscal year. Mr. Peterson mentioned that there were a couple of edits, so you'll see those in blue. The red edits were what was presented to the Finance Committee. The blue were what was requested and approved by the Finance Committee to forward to you today. I will share that one bit of feedback that came back with regard to the section on page 12 of the packet, page 3 of the agreement, was item C, number D. There was a question as to whether or not the language there was befitting to the services. And so we're certainly open if there's a suggestion for an alternative to support to Chesterfield County and City of Richmond. If there's better language there, certainly I'm open to that. But Otherwise, I think Plan RBA is comfortable with the content of the agreement, and the Finance Committee, if I'm not mistaken, has recommended approval today.
That is correct. That was the unanimous decision of the Finance Committee to recommend to this board approval of it.
Any question on B, anyone?
Mr. Chair, I might recommend support to Chesterfield County while putting on my hat as chair of Plan RDA. I think it's maybe a little broad in that they're more providing oversight. So if it would please the commission, I'd like to see if we could change that support to provide oversight to Chesterfield County and the city of Richmond.
What was that, Mr. Swinhouse?
That was page 12, section C, item D. The reason being is if Plan RDA is staffed appropriately and something happens, I just want to make sure that they're providing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Year, but the intention here is that you're providing more guidance and oversight as opposed to actually digging in.
That's correct. The MOUs with the fiscal agent agreement specify the arrangements that exist for the fiscal administration services. Plan RBA is providing kind of a coordinator role in that to make sure that items are flowing to this body and among the parties of those MOUs.
Chairman, would you accept that as a substitute motion?
Well, I think as the committee submitted this, I think it's necessary for this motion to amend the committee's recommendation. Is that correct, Mr. Gravy? So if that would be a motion to amend the committee's recommendation, we could address that and then adopt it. I think this board has to cover the amendment. The Finance Committee cannot.
So, Mr. Chair, I move that we change the language in section C, support services available from support to Chesterfield County to provide oversight to Chesterfield County.
Would that be a motion to approve as amended, Mr. Schoenhauer?
Yes.
So we move the amendment to be approved as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll do a roll call on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodrick.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Vice Chair. Richmond County.
Aye.
Thank you. Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
United County, Jeff Allen.
Aye.
Newcastle County, Ms. Page. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Dr. Nudo.
Um,
Delegate McQueen. Delegate McQueen, say with us?
Did you call me? Yes, I'm here. I can't hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator McClellan.
Aye.
PTB, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Mr. Chair, just making sure that they are not having problems hearing on the other hand. Is the volume?
Yeah, Mr. Mueller, a little faint, Mr. Carroll, but we can hear you fine, but Ms. Mueller was a little faint.
I'll speak up. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, with that motion on that, the next item on here was the discussion of the draft agreement for the locality. So that's going on over to Mr. Gregory to give us an update on that. No action will be required on this.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Chairman, members of the body. In your packet is the most recent draft of the MOA between the CVTA and the member localities. This will govern the distribution and allocation of funds between the CVTA and the member localities as received from the state. And you've seen this before. It has undergone multiple revisions It has received the input from the members of the TAC. Also, each of your local legal counsel has reviewed this multiple times and offered revisions which have been incorporated into this most recent draft. A couple of items I'll just bring to your attention. If you'll go with me to page 4 of 8, there was I wouldn't call it a significant change, but a change where we further clarified the schedule for the quarterly reporting right there in the middle of page 4. So those reports now are to be filed on the first of those respective months. And it also defines the period which those reports are to cover. So there's no confusion there. That's definitely a positive change.
Noticing it from the August, it says by August, but not August 1st. Is that something that needs to be amended? At least on my packet.
Oh, yeah, the strike through accidentally went through the number 1 and the number 5. So yes, August 1st. Thank you for that change. So we'll note that proposed amendment to correct that error. I'm sorry about that. The next item of note to bring to your attention is on page 8. The last page is Exhibit A, which was added. You've seen this before. This is the annual certification of expenditures instrument, which will be submitted on an annual basis by each of the member jurisdictions to certify that the funds expended have been expended in compliance with the statutory requirements, in compliance with the legislation. Okay, so this instrument will effectuate that. It's provided as an exhibit to make sure that it's incorporated as part of the agreement, so that this is the document that everybody will use to make that certification. So it was a sort of a standalone draft, and we've incorporated it now as an exhibit to the MOA. So that's where it stands now. I want to express appreciation to all of your local legal counsel who worked with me on this. Their input was instrumental in getting us to this point today. This is one of the final pieces of the puzzle, the administrative puzzle, as it were, of the authority to put in place all the things that you all need to do what you all want to do in terms of funding projects. So we're about there. One other item I'll bring to your attention. Because of the unique relationship between Hanover and Ashland, we have one paragraph that we've added to the agreement between the CVTA, or we will add to the agreement between the CVTA and the County of Hanover and the Town of Ashland, which will not be included in the versions of the MOA with the other member jurisdictions, obviously, because the way the funds are allocated they'll flow through Hanover County, or they'll actually flow directly to those jurisdictions, but those calculations of those distributions will be made by Hanover County. So there's an additional paragraph 7 in the version of the MOA with Hanover and Ashland to define that process, but that won't concern any of the other jurisdictions. It just defines the unique process that those two jurisdictions will comply. I don't think it's controversial. So that's where it is. This will come back to you for approval. Although we're not asking for your action to approve anything for execution today, we would ask for you to authorize staff to distribute the draft in its present form to the member jurisdictions for their respective governing bodies to consider it and take action on it sooner rather than later. We'd like to get it approved if possible by all the member jurisdictions in the month of June, so that then this body in its next meeting in July can come back and approve all of the MOAs that have been approved by the member jurisdictions, and then it could be signed on the dotted line by Chairman Thornton, and so that piece of the puzzle would be complete. If you're comfortable doing that, we can always bring it back for further review at the next meeting if you like.
Right, we need a motion for that, or can that be done by consensus?
I would like a motion for that.
I will make that motion.
Can't hear a second.
Yes. Wait.
Questions?
Mr. Chair, just a comment. I'm sorry.
Just a clarification, we're voting on the contract for the request for localities. Our agreement with Hanover County as described by Mr. Gregory is on the agenda for next Tuesday for us to act on. So are we voting on this agreement or?
So my motion is to have staff forward this draft agreement to all jurisdictions for review and possible approval by our June.
Thank you.
If I might, so you're basically, you're approving the MOA in its form as to principle, in principle, for distribution to the locality so they can take action on it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Schoenhour?
Yes, just want to clarify for the board. We will absolutely look at this. Our meeting is Tuesday and we weren't able to get it on the agenda for June. So we're planning on taking this up in the first week.
Any questions on that? Like to have roll call on this.
Mr. Chair, Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Richmond County, Mr. Schoonhour.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Aye.
New Kent County, Ms. Page. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Dr. Newbill.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
PTV, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Mr. Chairman, next item, it has come to my attention that Mayor Stoney, while he's not here, has some comments that he wanted to share with us. Now, Dr. Newbill has brought those comments relative to the next item on the finance committee agenda.
Thank you,
Dr.
Mr.
Newbill.
Yes, it's my pleasure to stand instead of our mayor and to co with Mr. Peterson being relative to the finance committee. But as I've been advised during the April CBT full body meeting, the CBT and the CVTA finance committee meeting, we were presented with information that has made us consider how the CBTA will look. And specifically, the kid wanted to bring a couple of items to this table for possible discussion. During the finance committee meeting, members were presented with a bond financing overview for regional projects. Future financing options that include bond or pay-go or pay-as-you-go or a mixture of both. There has been a conversation about reserves as well as a reserve policy. The financial advisors stated that they will be key decision factors for this body moving forward, whether we look toward bonding that would, and if we look toward bonding, that would need to be in place prior to consideration of bonding. First one, these are things that would need to be considered in advance of that consideration of bond financing. First, the timing, which includes having a spending plan or funding scenario plan in place. Second, determining the structure of the debt to include what the terms will be, and finally, an agreement on the future debt capacity. And I think it's pretty clear having a sound funding scenario in place is necessary, whether we fund one project or a package of projects. The funding scenario plan has to consist of a project listing that has the ability to impact all localities. And while pay-as-you-go or pay-go might take longer, the funding scenario plan becomes even more important if bond financing is considered. And so with that, Mr. Chair, if we could allow the floor for the discussion relative to this item. And again, this is looking at our future financing options as you discussed in bond, pay-go as you go, or mixture thereof. And the implications in terms of our needing to really have a solid plan of action no matter what the scenario.
Saved me a lot of talk.
I tried to be brief in this. You all had a lot of
It's-
discussion.
We did have extensive discussions on that, in terms of reserves, in terms of how bond ratings would be and how that would relate to our rating with the bonding community. We did speak about methods from pay-go to using as much leverage as possible to get put as many bonds out there as possible, to get as many projects on the road as soon as possible. We didn't come to any place. I think the majority of us came to a place somewhere. We need to be working to build reserves, but we need to be active in the community at the same time. But we did not make any decisions to bring back to this board. As Dr. Newbill mentioned, this is a discussion that we felt was important for the whole board to bring in on. So.
I think the other component as well, and some of what came up this morning as we talked about the fire project, is how we leverage the dollars that we have to attract other dollars so that we can do even more projects throughout the region. So all of those are components of considering how we finance.
It's okay, Mr. Chairman, I would like to open the floor for discussion on this item.
Any discussion on this item?
Mr. Chairman, Canova, you're on the finance committee. What is it that you're looking for from this body today? And we've had a number of things that address things that have to do with financing, debt capacity, spending plan, et cetera. What is it that you're looking for from this?
We're not
body
looking for,
today?
I don't think we're looking for specifics, but we do feel like that this is such a broad issue that the finance committee would like to have more input than just the 5 of us that are serving on that committee as to how we would approach using our funds over time. We do realize from all of our jurisdictions, whatever the bond rating capacity has a lot to do with how much we can. So we need to make sure we don't have a low bond rating. So we need to develop some kind of reserves. Do we don't want to put everything away in reserves at one time, which would take away from doing anything? Or do we build reserves over time? These are the very things Dr. Newbill is talking about, the very different options as to how we finance projects. So we've got to move forward, but we would like to have more input than just what's in the brains. I welcome other members of the finance committee to speak to this as well.
Well, I'd like to have a follow-up question if I may. I would, like to know, for example, what our financial advisor is saying about our debt capacity going forward. I would like to know, I'm sure you've done the modeling for revenues going out at least 10 years. So that you know what, those revenues are likely to look like. I'd like to also know, what does it look like in terms of being able, if you did have some type of reserve fund, if you did have a percentage of pay-go, what would the remaining monies look like in terms of if they were leveraged? If you did go into market, is it a 10-to-1? Is it what exactly is it? And your spending plan, most importantly, how does that align with your projected revenues and your debt capacity?
I'm going to be honest, we've got Mr. Parsons here, but I believe Mr. Brown is on the line with us as well.
Yeah,
He addressed this in there as far as
because
those percentages and the numbers,
Yeah.
he has a better handle on those than I.
Because right now in Powhatan County, we just, went through the adoption of a budget and a 10-year capital improvement plan. We're trying to take a page from our neighbor across the river, Vision, who has a 25-year CIP. But what we looked at was our debt policies and debt capacity, fund balance and things like that going forward with those projects going out over a 10-year period and making sure that we were in conformity with our policies in terms of how we were going to pay for these projects, whether it would be pay as you go or whether it was going to be going out to market. We had a plan, but we knew what the projects were. So at this point, I'm not sure we know exactly what is the scope of the projects going forward. We know that we're developing criteria for projects, but to actually know what those projects look like and have a cost and be able to put those projects out there against a spending plan that's in conformity with whatever we come up with in terms of our debt and spending policies. That would be the questions I would have. Do we have all the pieces right now?
We do not. And this finance committee heard a report from Davenport, which is financial advisor. And they basically presented us all the various scenarios that of how things could be done. We did not make any decisions look forward to. We do know that going forward, but we did hear from from the extremes, which is everything is pay as you go, to the other extreme is leverage everything you've got to get as many bonds as possible. And the general consensus, Chairman Thornton was there at the meeting. I'd like to bring it.
Because I just wanted to make sure that, I think Mr. Brown had a statement.
Well, again, I wanted to jump in because I think I agree with all of your comments. I think here's it's a chicken and egg scenario. You won't know what you can spend until you determine whether you're going to bond, in which case you potentially could get as much as 10-1. And there, again, we have the presentations from Davenport and others, based upon the reserves and the whole 9 yards. You won't know what you can program, I guess they use the technical term, until you determine what your approach is going to be. So if we decide that we're going to do a pay-go, then your issue is, well, you're only going to have roughly $70–80 million a year, in which case you only can program $70–80 million a year. If you decide that you were going to bond, then you might have as much as, $1 billion to program over a 4 or 5 year period, in which case you can make decisions there. So one of the decision points that we have to make is, what is our philosophy? The models are pretty clear. I don't think there's a lot of question about how we would execute either approach. But if you decide that we're only going to pay-go, then, for example, if we were to decide, and this goes back to the prior discussion, if we were to decide that we're going to commit initially to fund something like the Fall Line Trail, where after we do all the funding that we're going to do this cycle via the smart scale, we're still going to have roughly $100 million left. Well, the probability is you can't do anything else material in the region for probably 2 years, 2 or 3 years, if you decide that we're only going to pay-go. However, if you decide that you're going to bond, then you could commit to the Fall Line Trail. You could commit to, doing something on 288. You could commit to 64. You could commit to any number of projects because you'll have the bulk of the dollars. And I think that's the question the Finance Committee wanted to put to this board is, it's very, I'll just be frank. I'm the CTB member, so I'm not obligated to any jurisdiction. There are, if we talk about the Fall Line Trail, that's going to have a very significant impact on 4 or 5 of our jurisdictions. Very material. It will be good for the region. It will attract folks in. There will be some spillover activity, but it may not touch in a material way Goochland and Powhatan and New Kent. And so is it the philosophy that we want to wait until we get the Fall Line Trail done to put a stake in the ground and say we've been successful there before we are able to do something material in those jurisdictions? And again, I know that we talked about reallocating the dollars on a percentage basis, and that's all fine. But again, you all are the local elected leaders, and you very well know that when you do that allocation, you take the Fall Line Trail out, you do the allocation proportionally back to the other jurisdictions, it's not going to be material money, right? You're not talking about getting tens of millions of dollars invested in Goochland, New Kent, or Powhatan, or Charles City, or Ashland. It's going to be in the single digits. And what you can execute, roundabouts cost $5 million, right? So part of why the whole genesis for why we needed a CVTA was so that we could do big things, right? So that we could go after big things that individually no individual jurisdiction should have to bear alone because the benefit is mutually shared by the region. So if we choose to do PAYGO, that's a very conservative way to do it. It's responsible. No one's going to critique you in that regard, but it will take a lot longer to get those big things accomplished. And the question is that really the spirit of what we're doing here? So that is the question: is are we going to, take? And I think Mr. Carroll might say, well, maybe we do something PAYGO now with the expectation that maybe in a year or two, maybe we would do look at bonding, and that's a fair approach as well. But I think we need to have some understanding because that will drive and guide the programming. Mr. Parsons can prioritize projects, but he only can spend what we believe we'll have available, right? So if he's only going to have $80 million available, and I'm guessing that that's the regional piece of it, then that's all he can program. If he's going to have $2 billion available, then that's what he can program. And of course, it also goes to the leveraging state dollars. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I think I see Mr. Carroll and Mr. Spoonhouse. Okay.
To Mr. Peters, to answer your question, from Goochland County's perspective, the question we would want him to understand is what if we were to enter into bonds as a group, what, if anything, could that potentially do to our individual bond ratings as counties? Goochland County is extremely proud of the fact that we are the only county in the country of our size to have 2 AAA bond ratings, and we're going for our 3rd. So understanding the potential impacts to our individual bond ratings would be something we'd like to have answered. Not for now, but for later.
This was brought as an informational item to the
Right.
board.
Yep.
This is not, these policies will be put into a stronger form and recommended from the finance committee back to this board as we go forward.
This is informational.
Yes.
Mr. Carroll,
Yeah.
Ms. Carroll has a statement.
For me, this just illuminates the fact that we need a strategic funding plan, that be streets bond, PAYGO, or a mixture thereof, based on what it is we want to accomplish over what period of time. I think this really raises that to that level of discussion and finance will bring back after more discussion and some more.
Well, that's why we wanted to hear what everybody else had to say. It's not the none of us.
Ms. Carroll?
So I think that in one of our previous meetings, unless I'm getting old and forgetting things, that we had a presentation from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which was designed to give us an insight as to what they were able to accomplish within both of their organizations and the timelines which took, and talked about their ability to issue bonds. And you're absolutely right. And the point that all of you make is that we have to come up with a plan moving forward. And I certainly think that the full board needs to have the same benefit that the finance committee did, to have the presentation brought before them on what the possibilities are and what that would look like. As Mr. Brown has said, whether you do PAYGO or if you do bonding, or you do a combination of both, and then collectively we're going to have to put our heads together to say, can we do that? The other part of that presentation will answer your question, which is, how would this affect your county bond rating, or would it affect the county bond rating? Would the CVTA have the ability to issue matching bonds, as an example, to a bond project that you would propose for your 50% portion to create, or any jurisdiction for that matter? And so those questions certainly need to be answered as to how we do that. And that's why with the TAC coming forward, I think maybe by August, with some recommendations on what the process will look like and how we would prioritize regional projects, is really important for us to be able to look at that and then determine how we're going to do that, and then actually get something in place on what the projects will look like. Then we have to sit and decide 2 things. Number 1, how are we going to do it, whether it's PAYGO or with bonds? And 2, how are we going to manage it? And part of the discussion that we had in the finance committee was, what's future staffing needs for the CBTA in the future? And we really need to know where you're going to decide what you actually need, right? So, part of that discussion that I hope to bring forward is how we can get to that process. And if that helps clarify everything. But I think the whole board needs to see the financial proposals and be able to ask exactly the questions that you've been asking about how it will affect, not just the CBTA, but our individual jurisdictions.
Mr. Gregory has a point. Right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Carroll's points and some of the other points that were discussed, I would only add that in order to further explore these issues and get some of the answers to these questions, I would suggest that the body consider issuing an RFP for financial advisor. Davenport provided the financial or the presentation to the Finance Committee as pursuant to their support of Chesterfield County, but as Mr. Peterson mentioned, they're Chesterfield County's financial advisor. They're not the financial advisor for the CVTA. Now that we do have the MOU with Chesterfield to provide support services, but in my view, that doesn't extend to providing financial advisor services. I believe this body would have to issue its own RFP to engage its own financial advisor. And I would encourage you to consider doing that. I think it would be valuable, even if the body never proceeds with bonding, even if you just go pay-go, having those services and that guidance are going to be crucial. And some of these other questions that you asked about the bond rating and how those transactions might impact the member jurisdictions, bond counsel is going to be necessary to engage as well as part of that. Each of your member jurisdictions has financial advisor and bond counsel that are independent of your general counsel, your county attorney, right? So you need those services. I wish I could provide those services. I can't. I'm not a bond lawyer, but you need one to help you all through this. Okay, so I would encourage you. You don't have to issue an RFP for legal counsel like bond counsel. That's not required under the Code of Virginia. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you're not required to go through the procurement process under the CBTA. So you all might want to think about how you want to do that if you want to do that. I would encourage you to consider hiring bond counsel through a process that we can talk about, and also issuing an RFP again to determine or to procure financial advisor services. We know that Davenport has already submitted a presentation to encourage you to select them. We know that PFM has done so as well. So they're all watching, others are watching too, and they want the business. So, and that's good. It's going to be good for them, good for you, good for your tax dollars and the taxpayer. So I would encourage you to maybe not today, but at some future meetings, direct staff to prepare and issue an RFP subject to your approval.
Yeah. I actually think that's an excellent idea, and if we actually need to do that sooner than later, because as Mr. Brown brought up, as time moves forward and we come up with a prioritization process, and then we want to turn on and vote on what those priorities are, and then vote on how we're going to do it. I think we need to have that in place to help us make those decisions. So I would make a motion for us to advise staff to prepare an RFP to bring for us to the next meeting for our consideration for that.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask for clarification? Are you talking about an RFP for bond counsel?
Financial advisor, I'm sorry, financial advisor.
Okay, because, Mr. Gregory did a good job of explaining the difference.
Yep.
And there is a big difference.
Yep.
Because one is selling you securities, investment instruments, for commissions. And the other one is standing back and making decisions, legal decisions, and providing you with information about the efficacy of going in certain different directions.
I think we probably need both.
Well, that's what's going to be my point of clarification, because it wasn't either or, it was both and.
Yes.
To include the bond, but to also allow us to look at the other options, but also the implications as we look at them for our various jurisdictions. So that was
Perfect clarification. Yep.
So right, exactly. So you have, as you know, in your local jurisdictions, you have bond counsel, which is your lawyer advising you on the bond transaction and the legal compliance components of that transaction, right? And they do all the resolutions that you all see that are about almost an inch thick sometimes to govern that financial transaction, right? That's what you have. Then you have the financial advisor there's the Davenports, the PFMs of the world that they're the quote, the money guys or whatever. They put together the transaction. They work with you to advise you on the best strategy. They help you obtain the bond ratings from Moody's and the other rating agencies. And they walk you through those transactions, working with bond counsel and the authority, of course. And they advise you on the best strategy, the best funding options, the best, everything from interest rates to who's going to be the underwriter, all those things. That's what they do. Okay, so you need both components in order to put those pieces of the puzzle together to fund those transactions if you decide to do that. So I would definitely encourage you all to engage with those pieces.
Right. So I guess the best way to move forward is perhaps is to forward that suggestion to the finance committee for recommendation and have you present those to the finance committee so we can present them out in the full committee. That's what I would recommend. Yes, sir. I'll amend my motion to that.
We'll put that on finance committee.
Yes, I will.
That work?
Yes. I'll make sure the mayor.
Bill, did I see you having another comment that you wanted to add to this?
No, that. Ms. Heater, any comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarification from a staff flow. So if the recommendation and the motion is to have this go back to finance committee, we could include it on the agenda for June 9th. And then I think it would take probably another convening at least at the finance committee to be able to bring forward the types of documents that Mr. Gregory is talking about. So I think we're going to want to do a consultation with the council of legal counsel as well as the finance directors work group in the interim along the way before we bring these documents.
So we wouldn't have anything to look at to move forward until the following month?
I think that July is possible. I would say if we want to set a deadline, I would prefer to give us until August just to be able to make sure that we can do the proper consultations and not bring incomplete documents forward.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just as I'm curious, does this body need to review and approve the RFP before it goes out? I mean, I think I think we have confidence in staff that they could, we're not talking about something that's so unique, right? We're just looking for a financial advisor and bond counsel. Those are not those are not specialized skills. There are a number of firms, number of entities that can do that. Do we need to have that come back prior to it going out? Or I guess I would commend it. I don't think we.
I think the answer would be no if the committee authorizes, if the authority authorizes it to go forward. Absent that authority, I think it needs to come back to the authority.
So
I think.
Just a point of clarification, so, I believe the motion was made to have this go to finance, which then would have review and bring back review of these both categories. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Did we get a second to go?
We did not have a second.
Oh, okay. So I was trying to, and then the other part in terms of the question being raised, is the finance committee is working with our staff. And I'm not sure what more in terms of
Well, when you come back to
approval needs to happen with, the full body, but that's just a question.
I would think that, Mr. Chairman, that this body directs the finance committee to make that review and give them the authority.
Okay, all right, so, we have a motion, and we have a second other question on motion. This will be going to the finance committee. Okay, you have roll call over this, Madam Clerk?
Chair, one second, the clarification on the motion, because I think a really good point is.
Clarification on the motion.
And I also, I think that I want to make sure it's the wishes of this body to refer this to finance, for them to review and give authorization of finance to approve.
So to develop and issue the
Yes.
RFP.
Yes, yes. Yes.
Any other questions, any other business on that? Okay.
And bond counsel, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but does the body want to issue an RFP for bond counsel, which is not required, or just authorize the finance committee to develop a plan to engage bond counsel?
I think
Great, Carl.
no, I think it should be an RFP. I think otherwise, how would we select it? So I think we don't, I think we're not required to adhere to some of the public procurement requirements there, but I think we should issue an RFP for bond counsel.
Roll call vote.
Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Richmond County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Middleworth County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Aye.
New Kent County, Ms. Page. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Dr. Newbill.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn. We'll come back to see if she's still with us. Senator McClellan.
Aye.
PCB, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Back to Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Thank you, ma'am. This concludes the roll call.
Mr. Chairman, one last item from Finance Committee, under the future needs of CVTA. This is, as Mr. Chairman had mentioned, staffing. CVTA. The Finance Committee did discuss future staffing on CVTAs and voted on a, it was not a unanimous vote, it was a 3-2 vote to send to this board a motion to direct staff to develop job descriptions for an executive director, executive assistant, and such other roles as are deemed appropriate, with the objective to fill these roles within the next 6 months. That came out of Finance Committee on a 3-2 vote to this committee as a motion.
See if I can speak to that. I have a different idea, and I'd like to defer that recommendation from finance and ask the chair to create an ad hoc personnel committee to study the issue and report back. And once the committee's formed, put them on a timetable. And the reason for this is, as I said earlier, as we proceed forward and we develop, how the money part of this is going to work, then we need to know what we need to do to staff. And so Mr. Brown had made the motion for these in the committee, and I don't disagree with us having to take a hard look at what staffing needs the CVTA will have in the future. But it's hard for me to gauge what staffing needs are when you actually don't know what the work is. And although the other two organizations that we had presentations from, that's the model that they put in, I think for us as a group, for our members to take a look at this, and quite frankly, I think it's, me personally, we've contracted with Plan RVA to provide services for us, and they've done, I think, a phenomenal job to get us off the ground. And I don't think it's quite fair, in my personal opinion, to make them then turn around and try and develop information to actually possibly replace the work that they do for us. And so I think it's our responsibility as a board to make those decisions and certainly utilize the resources we have available to us, not just through Plan RVA, but perhaps our regional resources for our HR departments to define what the personnel needs will be for the CVTA based on what work we want to accomplish in the future. And so I would ask that we defer that and ask you as chair to appoint members of this body to serve in that capacity.
Any questions, Mr. Carroll?
I think we just need to make sure we're. So, is Mr. Carroll, are you making a substitute motion, or are you?
Yes.
Speaking to the prior motion.
I'll make that in the form of a substitute motion to ask the chair to create the ad hoc Personnel Committee.
Second.
That was a raise.
Okay, I agree, and as chair pursuant to Article 5, Section E of bylaws.
Mr. Chairman, I think we actually have to act on the motion. I think it has to be an action on the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion.
Yeah, right, discussion. Mhm. I'd like to speak to, I'd like to speak to it if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Agreeing ad hoc personnel committee charged to study and report back on staffing solutions for the authority. I will appoint and contact the members of the personnel committee
Mr.
after
Chairman,
this meeting.
Mr. Chairman, point of order,
Yes.
we can't do that until after we've decided to vote on the substitute motion, which we've not done yet. But I'd like to speak to the substitute motion before we move forward, if that's okay. So so the main motion came from the Finance Committee. Mr. Carroll is making a substitute motion. It's been seconded, so that's the main motion on the floor that we have to speak to. I'd like to speak to that before we move forward with taking a vote on the substitute motion to replace that, and then ultimately we have to approve that motion before we can actually take action.
You want to speak to the motion?
So what I want to say is that I will support this motion, but I think it is important to clarify, and I'd actually like to defer and get Ms. Heater to speak. In the Finance Committee, we had a very robust discussion, and I think without equivocation, Ms. Heater and the Plan RVA team expressed the fact that they did not have the capacity to continue to support the CVTA kind of in a robust fashion going forward, and that quite frankly, under the current expectations, resources at Plan RVA are being stretched. So what led to the motion, which I did make in the Finance Committee, was relying on that information that Plan RVA had asserted that they did not have the capacity to continue to operate and manage the CVTA functions in the way that we expect and anticipate growing forward. So I would just like to defer to Ms. if you could speak to that. But I do support the motion, but I think it's understanding that we understand that it's not that we simply want to hire staff, but it's that the staff we have now are expressing concern about their ability to support our activities going forward and what will likely be expanding opportunities going forward. So Mr. Chairman, if you may, I'd like to have Ms. Heater.
Ms. Heater?
Yes, thank you. I think you're correct. I would offer a little bit of greater context. As everyone is well aware as of today's meeting, we've been under a one-year agreement with the CBTA. And so I would say that with our current capacity, we are not in a position to be able to expand our staff capacity to meet the CBTA with a one-year commitment. I think if we were invited to participate in the discussions and the deliberations about the future needs of the CBTA, I believe that our organization is equipped to scale, but we would need to be able to work with the CBTA to be able to understand the duration of that commitment and what the needs are. I think Mr. Carroll said it very well. It's difficult to say what staffing should be put in place when a lot of the decisions about what the functionality of the authority will look like going forward. But I do think that we have the ability to scale, and if invited to do so, we would certainly make moves to be able to increase our internal capacity to meet the needs of the CBTA. I think the MOU that was just approved today helps us take one step in that direction. That is a one-year commitment, and so I would like to be able to continue to have discussions about how we could make that arrangement work. But certainly we would be interested in participating in the discussions to assist the CBTA in any way we possibly can.
Any other input?
Mr. Chair?
Delegate McQuinn?
Yes. So are we, okay, so in terms of, it appeared that, I guess that the discussion is expanding the services, but with the CV, are we just talking about this particular action item? Or are they asking for a longer term agreement to help facilitate, I guess, those issues that the CVTA need facilitated, or those items that need to be facilitated? So are you just talking about this? Because I thought that based on what is being recommended, we're looking for actually executive director, executive assistants. Are we also going to need the additional support, overall support? Because I guess that's a bigger issue that we certainly need to discuss and talk about.
I believe that the MOU that you approved today provides for, included in the services already negotiated, that Plan RVA can facilitate the process for CVTA in this coming fiscal year to evaluate its staff and move to a longer term staffing plan. I think that if at such point in the future, Plan RVA is asked to provide for more of those services, we can come back to you with a proposal. But I do not believe that you need to take any action today to modify the agreement with Plan RVA. I think if the motion on the table now to be able to move forward with the establishment of the personnel committee, we are equipped to be able to support that. And as Mr. Carroll said, I think we would work very closely with the HR roundtable to be able to meet the needs of that committee. So I do not think that this requires any change or modification to the current MOU, and any recommendations out of the personnel committee could come back if there's a necessary amendment in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think the delegate asked a very good question. Which goes right at the heart of, I believe, of what you're proposing with the personnel committee. Because you have to first know the requirements for what it is that you want people to do. And those requirements, if you do some type of hierarchical roll-up, is, leadership, are you looking at administration? But you gotta look at what are we asking these people to do? Then once we look at what we're asking these people to do, and we can develop, the position descriptions that match the requirements. And then we can take a look at what type of resources that we have among us to include Plan RVA. Then we can take a better look at what, we may want to continue with or not continue with Plan RVA. And certainly have a clearer idea about what we want these positions to do. So again, I think the delegate asked a very good question, and I'm going to be in support of your proposal, Mr. Chairman, for the personnel committee.
Other comments?
I concur. I mean, the questions beg the issue and make the point of why we can.
Okay.
That kind of confidence that we can occur, and that we end up with the kind of infrastructure we need to undergird the work of CBTA across the board. Our needs, what then we want to see. I mean, this makes the point. So I would concur with what you
Okay. All right, if you, with your application, we do this. Okay, let's vote on the motion. All those, we'll do it, roll call.
Mr. Chair.
Vote, I believe, is sufficient unless or this is to create a personnel committee, correct?
I think Delegate McQuinn may have had a question.
Question, someone?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just would hope that, I mean, if we would restate the motion, please. I'm just a little bit confused and it's difficult to hear in many ways.
Sorry about that. I will speak louder.
That's okay. That's okay.
I have the voice for that. I'm recommending.
I'm a Baptist preacher.
I think I can speak loud enough. I'm just asking that the chairman create an ad hoc personnel committee to study and report back on what the actual needs of the staffing solutions will be for the CVTA.
Okay.
Asking him to appoint personnel from this board to serve on that committee and charge them with a timeline to report back in conjunction with the other things that we're moving forward. That would be my motion.
Mr. Chairman, have we voted on the substitute motion?
We have not, and she wanted a clarification on the motion, and that's why I brought it back forward.
This is all part of it.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's a
yes.
substitute motion.
Okay, we heard the motion. Do we have a second?
There was a second. yes.
One
Second.
Three now, four.
This is vodka.
Chair will suggest a roll call vote with this one. Chair?
Roll call.
You're welcome. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Vice Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Richmond County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Jeff Orrington. Newton County, Ms. Page.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Dr. Needle.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Senator McClellan. CTV, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
We'll circle back to Senator McClellan. Is she
Nicole, I believe
still-
the senator had to leave.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Mr. Chairman,
It's gonna-
I misspoke a little earlier. I said this was going to be simpler than the first. But that is the.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we do have to vote now on the main motion, now that we've replaced the committee's recommendation. So just to make sure we're following procedure here. So we have to do another vote on what we just voted on to make that to a formally approved.
Second.
The motion was deferred. I make a motion to defer the finance to the original motion.
I'll second that.
So that's a deferral.
Second questions. All in favor, vote aye.
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 Opposed? And it is. Okay, now we move to. That's it, that's Peterson, yours, that's it. Now we
I
move
hope
to
so, sir.
Item 7. CVTA nominating committee update. Ms. Page.
Mr. Chair, hopefully my time here will be less than the two previous actions.
I wouldn't say that out loud.
So I need everybody on my team. Mr. Chair, the nominating committee was tasked by you, sir, for nominations. And as we spoke, you said for the chair and vice chair of the full body and for the finance. After going through our current bylaws, we were authorized for nominations for the chair and the vice chair of the full body. And so that was the task, sir, that we undertook. And so that's why we're coming to you today with 2 nominations. So the nominating committee and that committee, and so we're grateful for the appointment of Mr. Peterson, Mr. Hodges, Mr. Williams, and myself. We met on May the 25th with Attorney Gregory, Mr. Parsons, and Ms. Heater in our presence, along with, after I found out later, the majority of you all. And we made our nominations consistently with our current bylaws. We were responsible for submitting the names of 1 or 2 persons, the chair and the vice chair of this authority. We unanimously agreed that it would be to the best interest, since we are going through, as Mr. Peterson said, a birthing of this year CVTA, that our recommendation for chair and vice chair for fiscal year 2022 for the elections item on the agenda to be held on July this year, our July meeting would be our chair, Mr. Frank Thornton, and our vice chair, Mr. Kevin Carroll. I wanted you to know that we also, in our meeting, discussed provisions of the bylaws relating to the membership of our finance committee. And the bylaws provided that the finance committee included 5 persons. And those are 5 persons of the authority. 3 of those persons are members and representatives of the jurisdictions of the highest population, which consists of Chesterfield, Henrico, and Richmond, while the remaining 2 are appointed by the authority. The nominating committee went on to recommend the authority to consider vesting responsibility with the nominating committee for the recommendation of the names of the persons to serve in the 2 seats of the finance committee to be appointed by the authority, which would require an amendment to the bylaws. And until such time, the authority as a body holds responsibility for determining the persons who will serve on the finance committee in the 2 open seats. We are in agreement that we had much discussion in our first organizing meeting. We think that with everything that went on that day, indeed this was done. However, a failure to change it in the bylaws was done. And we think that it was absolutely an oversight. We don't think that it was intentional or anything like that, but we do recommend that change to the bylaws, as well as our nominees for fiscal year 2022, sir.
Do we have a recommended language for the bylaws change?
Yes, sir. The nominating committee, we recommend the authority consider vesting responsibilities for the recommendation of the names to serve in the 2 seats of the finance committee to be appointed by the authority, which would require an amendment to the bylaws. So, that's our recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the body, I will present a report on the bylaws amendments. This recommendation from the nominating committee would also require a bylaws amendment. You could consider that today. I have language that would effectuate that change. You could consider that today. Under your bylaws, to amend the bylaws, it first has to go and undergo a first reading, which the amendments that are on the table today will receive that first reading. Then you undergo the second reading, and then the amendments could be further amended and vote on it at the second meeting, or after the second reading at the next meeting. If you want to consider a bylaws change to effectuate the recommendation of the nominating committee, if you so choose today, you can waive the bylaw requirement that it be proposed, that it be germane to, that the amendment be germane to the present amendment. So you could conduct the first reading of that change today and just do it wholesale. If you're not ready to do that, we could take care of the first reading of the present changes and then add this to a future meeting where you would then conduct the first reading of the change at the future meeting and then carry forward. It's up to you whether you want to do it, if you're ready, if you want to do it all together today, waive the germaneness requirement, and take the first reading of all the amendments today, including what the nominating committee recommends, or if you want to take it a little bit slower, it's up to the body.
What does the body feel about that? Any suggestions from the body?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to recommend that we go ahead and have a consideration for the first reading today. Given the nature of the amendment, it's innocuous. It's really trying to bring in alignment what we agreed to at the organizational meeting. We made changes to the bylaws. And we believe as a nominating committee that what happened was those changes didn't bleed down into the later section of the bylaws dealing with the nominating committee to include those two remaining positions of the finance committee. So given the nature of the amendment and the fact that this is really, in my way of thinking, more housekeeping than anything else, I would like to make a motion that we go ahead and place it for the first reading today with the other amendment.
If I may request that in the form of a motion to
I'll make that
waive
motion.
to waive the germaneness requirement for the bylaws.
I can waive the germaneness if I need.
I believe that was the motion, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you.
Is there a second? Any questions? All those in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Is there a roll call vote on that?
I don't think so, but just make sure that the online people are heard.
Present online, are you with us?
We're here.
Okay, all right. Those in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. So, what you do against some of those items?
Okay, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Ms. Page still has the floor on her nominating committee report.
With that being said, I have given the nomination for this year, 2022, which is to nominate Honorable Frank Gordon as chair, Honorable Kevin Carroll as vice chair. And these recommendations, their recommendations, will be included as part of our election item on our July meeting agenda.
Yes.
And maybe this is, I certainly would concur with that. I guess this, in terms of the chairs of finance committee, what specifically, are you making recommendation relative to that? I mean, for the very reason you're recommending that we have the two chairs remain as chairs, the continuity, and based on where we are, I'm just trying to how do we get to that place?
Absolutely. Initially, we were charged with that task after reading the bylaws. The bylaws specifically said that the finance committee would appoint their own officers. I'm pretty sure I read it correctly. We would absolutely take that task on, but in our reading, I don't know where it's.
At this point, given the current and what we understand the potential changes to the bylaws to be, at the time of your July organizational meeting, it would be the intention that we would schedule things such that following the authority meeting and selection of the remaining two members of the finance committee, we would plan to convene a finance committee meeting whereby the finance committee would then conduct its elections of the chair and the vice chair. So that is the staff plan at this point in time, as we understand the interpretation and the instructions of the bylaws.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I will just add that as the bylaws stand presently, there is no term for the chair and the vice chair of the finance committee. Okay, so that's undefined. That was not defined by the body when you all adopted your bylaws. It's up to the body if you wish to define it now with a further bylaws amendment or whatever you want to do. But right now, yes, ma'am.
So, what, Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw that only because I'm here instead of the mayor whose current chair was. I raising that in Mr. Peterson's here, so I'll withdraw that. That's not consistent with that practice.
So I found Article 5 in the section B of committees, and it did say the chair and the vice chair of committee shall be elected by the committee. So that's why we didn't undertake that.
That's clarifying, not having the choices staff. I mean, in that section. Thank you.
I have completed my report, sir.
Ms. Page, Mr. Hodge, Mr. Williams. Want to thank you for taking the time, extra time, for working with the new bird and putting officers in place. And thank you, Ms. Page, for being ship leader with this. And all we're trying to do is rather simple, trying to put the formation blocks in place so that in the future, we have an excellent foundation. So thank you, and the rest of you very much.
Mr. Chair, this committee does have the understanding that these are indeed our recommendations. However, we do know that as present chair, that you can absolutely entertain motions for nominees from the floor. So we understand that, so.
Mr. Chairman, I just hope that Canova was watching her chair, this page, and the performance of her duties, and she serves as an example, for getting through recommendations.
Did a lot faster than I did.
But there were more moving parts. in Finance to consider.
You had time to practice, man.
Thank you. Okay, now we go to business C. For this one, we have the FY22 Regional Public Transportation Plan.
Good morning, members of the board. I apologize for my appearance. This is Julie Tim with GRTC. If you can't tell, I had LASIK yesterday and there was a little bit of an issue, so I have to wear some face covering. Apologies for the sunglasses. We will be coming forward. So instead of me presenting the information on here, I'm going to be asking our Chief Development Officer, Adrian Torres, to provide the details of the draft public transportation plan for FY22 for the members of this board to consider. We would be asking, I believe, for that to be approved at the next meeting so that you have time to consider and review what it contains. And with that, I will, with permission, transfer over to Ms. Torres.
Good morning. I'm going to provide you guys just info. As Julie said, it'll come back to the June meeting to actually be voted on. Just a little bit of background. We have been working in collaboration with the TPO through the Public Transportation Working Group, an ad hoc group with the TPO, to develop the Regional Public Transportation Plan. So coming to you guys with kind of the priorities that we have listed for FY22. And this has been supported by two consultant groups, Michael Baker and Associates and Jarrett Walker and Associates. So the two things that were attached for the meeting, we have the summary document. I'm not actually going to go through that kind of as the overview, and that went to our board at our last board meeting on the 18th. And there is also a more detailed version that was also attached, which is the draft plan. That is the same thing, just a lot more detail with it, and has an appendix to it. All right, so with that, this is our inaugural plan. So we plan on using FY22 actually to do some more work, to do more regional transit planning, a longer process to do our FY23 plan further. So a little bit of background on our expenses that are projected for FY22. Operational expenses equal $63.2 million, and our proposed capital expenses equal about $30.9 million. And we're continuing to refine this. Our actual plan will go for approval in June. So we hope to come up with efficiencies to decrease this at this point in May. That is what we're projecting. We have 4 priorities that we plan on addressing with this plan. And first is just to maintain our current transit operations at the levels that are currently operated in FY21. To prioritize capital requirements and maintain assets of state of good repair. To advance planning studies for operational and capital mobility priorities, and then prepare for expansion and any other transit modes that come out of the studies that are done for the microtransit, with that, and those initiatives will begin in FY23. So as far as how that relates to specifically the CVTA transit funding, well, we plan on using our FY21 dollars to for our FY22 plan. We are expected to accrue $20.3 million. At this point in time, we've been approved to use $200,000 of the FY21 to pay for the plan as it's being developed. So that leaves about a balance of $20.1 million projected with FY21. We are projecting between the operational capital expenses a need of CBTA funds to be about $21.2 million. So of course, between the 20.1 and 21.2 million, that does leave a net balance, and we are planning, recommending to use our federal COVID relief funds to cover whatever the balance difference might be. And going into, and I do apologize, can you guys actually open the summary document? I'm going to go through the table with you. Looking at it on my screen and didn't realize it was not up on yours. If you can hit the PDF in the document and the agenda.
We've got it, Adrian.
Okay. All right, so a little bit more detail on the actual dollars that go with those priorities. So maintaining the existing 6-route service, the 20.1 million is what we're estimating for that. To support capital leverage for state and federal grants, it's about $700,000 of the FY21. For each of the studies, they're separately $200,000, and that is for a regional study on potential on-demand services and micro transit across the region. And then to do our FY23 plan, looking at all the work we've done in FY21 related to expansion and then incorporating what we come up with the on-demand services as well. So again, the summary of that is about 21.2 million. So looking at a balance of about 1.1 million. For the FY22 accruals we'll be getting over the next fiscal year, we are recommending to put that into a reserve that is restricted and using those dollars for the next fiscal year. And that's kind of our plan in the short term moving forward to make sure that those dollars are realized so that we can at least keep our services stable and can actually plan for each of the expansions that we do in the future. Any questions for that?
Any questions from Ms. Torres? Okay, no questions. All right. This was for information. Okay. Any other comments from Ms. Tim or Ms. Torres? Any other comments? Not, thank you so very much.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe she addressed item A.
Item A. Right.
Board of Directors.
8A, okay.
I believe that item A, that the document we received should have in the agenda, and I can't see that in front of me, should have two parts. The first part is approximately 2 pages is the summary that we did give to our board of directors. That is what Ms. Torres just provided to you. And of course, item B is the detail of it.
Okay. That was my fault. Okay. We thank you for that. Any questions, anyone? Okay, thank you so very much, Ms. Tillman and Ms. Torres. Okay. Now we go to item 9, first reading of the CVTA Bylaws Amendment. Mr. Gregory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the body, want to present to you a draft of your bylaws amendment. As discussed earlier, this will qualify as the first reading of these amendments. To amend the bylaws, you have a 2-step process. They're presented for the first reading, which occurs today, and then a second reading, which will occur at the next meeting or at a future meeting, and action at that time or at some subsequent time as you so choose. You earlier approved the motion to waive the germaneness about expanding the nominating committee authority under the bylaws. So I'll also present an amendment to effectuate that. That will also be included within the first reading that you're undertaking today of these other amendments. Okay, so walk with me now through the bylaw amendments. On page 1, These bylaws, the principal reason for the amendment of the bylaws that you're undertaking today and going forward is to include the member of the Virginia Port Authority as a member of the CVTA pursuant to the legislation which Delegate McQuinn had approved at the last General Assembly session. So in order to do that, you have to change Article 2, subsection A, to change the number of the members from 16 to 17. Okay, so that actually is not included in as track changes on the document before you, but that will remain to the further amendment, which we'll talk about on the second page here. So that's just changing that number. So it'll strike 16 there and change it to 17 under Article 2, subsection A, that first sentence there, right in the middle. Okay, and then related to that, on the following page at the top there, you will see the strike through or the additional language there on track changes reflecting the addition of the executive director of the Virginia Port Authority or his or her designee. Okay, that's the 17th member of the authority. Interestingly, I'll just note that the legislation under McQuinn's House Bill 1926 states that it allows the executive director of the VPA to have a designee. Interestingly, the GRTC executive director and the RMTA executive director, the language in the statute doesn't allow for them to have a designee. They're always here. They're consistent in that. That's just a sort of a nerd lawyer point. Yes, sir.
Not any issue with what's been posed here, but as a question. I think at the last meeting, as we talked about ex officio members, I asked if we vetted representation from the airport. Right, if that had occurred, and
that you are correct. That was discussed in order to add a member to an additional member to the authority. That would require legislation, just like it did in the case of the Port Authority.
okay, but even before we entertain adding, I mean, was it vetted as to whether or not that would be a significant ex officio partnership in our effort at all?
I don't know to what extent. I mean, it was discussed on my recollection, but I don't know if the authority did anything more, had conducted anything more than an initial discussion. Moving on to Article 3, subsection C, and this is what you discussed a moment ago. Okay, per Mr. Williams' motion to waive germaneness to expand the authority of the nominating committee. This change is not reflected on the draft before you, but the language which I would suggest in Article 3, subsection C, would be to strike the clause 1, 2, 3 on the end of the fourth line and bleeding over to the fifth line, to strike each office to be filled. Okay, and then inserting the following: the offices of chair and vice chair, and for the 2 finance committee members appointed by the authority. Period. Okay, so that sentence, which I propose amending to effectuate your desire, would read, and it's the second sentence of that paragraph. Excuse me. At the annual organizational meeting, comma, the nominating committee shall submit the name or names of 1 or more persons for the offices of chair and vice chair, and for the 2 finance committee members appointed by the authority. Period. And then the paragraph would move on. Additional nominations may be made by any member at the annual meeting. Okay. So that would effectuate, I believe, what your desire was or what the nominations committee recommended. If you all approve it, this would constitute the first reading today. I would, because you waived your manus to allow for that, I would, if you all are in approving, the authority approves the draft amendments, I would ask for a motion to that effect today, so we're clear that that accomplishes the first reading. Now, I will also recommend, and this is germane to the appointment of the VPA member, the consideration that the body consider allowing the Virginia Port Authority to have a member of the TAC. Now, that's not required, but if they're a member of the body, every other member, other agency member has a member of the TAC. You may want to consider adding them as well. And I have language that would accomplish that today, if you'd like me to share it with you. Okay, if you go to page 8 of the bylaws, under Technical Advisory Committee, it's a simple change. It would just change the under subsection C2 there towards the bottom. It would change the membership of the TAC from 14 to 15 members. And then you would just simply insert the Virginia Port Authority in the list of agency members of the TAC. And that's all I have.
Mr. Gregory, also the issue that Dr. Newbill brought up about how there is an agency that someone might want to suggest to come to this. Would you go over the process for that again? I think you mentioned it a few moments ago.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Newbill, or Dr. Newbill, sorry, in terms of the authority, if the authority wished to request the addition of a representative from the airport authority, I would recommend that be discussed with Senator McClellan or Delegate McQuinn for them to prepare and submit legislation to that effect, which my understanding, General Assembly is coming back into session in perhaps August. I don't know if they could accomplish that then, maybe not, or maybe not, but that could be considered by the General Assembly. If they approve it, we would undergo through the same process at that appropriate time.
Thank you so very much.
Yes.
You want to take over? Dr. Newbill?
Yeah, I only offer that having ex officio membership.
We speak.
Okay. That it just seemed to, that was the only thing that seemed to be possible. But I understand the process, and if the body decides that the body we'll simply make sure we have all the representative entities in terms of that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair McQuinn, I think that was the with Dr. Newbill, but I didn't hear the statement. But if you allow me, Mr. Chair, to say this, that these are growing pains, and so we are reviewing this as we go along. What we didn't get accomplished this year, we do intend to revisit to make sure that all the I's are being dotted and the T's are being crossed. And so if there are other entities that need to be a part of it, we can make certain that that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for those comments. Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the first reading of the bylaws.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion has been made and second. Are there any questions? Let's do a roll call vote.
Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Cleveland County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Aye.
Yukon County, Ms. Page.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Dr. Neville. Aye. Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
And CTV, Mr. Brown. That concludes the roll call.
Okay, all right, we're at number 10.
What?
Number
Already?
10. All right, okay. I don't really have any comments, but I do have some questions in the form of how you can help us for the next CVTA meeting. What are the commissioners feel about that? Do you, Henrico, we could host the next group, or what we could do, we could also do it at the convention center, which is centrally located. And we also would like, maybe the other person would like to host this. Here again, we want to thank Mr. Carroll.
Well, thank Mr. Mann.
All right,
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Carroll,
so
for
much.
having everyone down.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for all of that. Okay, other members?
I would actually like to make sure everybody knows who Shane Mann is, and Shane, give you an opportunity to speak about this wonderful facility and perhaps tell a little bit about the tour that they have an opportunity to attend after the meeting.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Yeah, we would be more than happy to take any of you that are interested, staff or authority members, on a short tour of the building. There's a very exciting part of the building just over kind of behind this wall where we have Virginia State Police and our Transportation Operations Center in the same room. Leslie, did you confirm, is it 32 55-inch monitors up on the screen? There's a whole wall of TVs that we have all the cameras on. So we'd really love for all of you who would like to stay for a 15-minute tour or so, just to get an opportunity to see our new facility here. And again, thank you, Mr. Carroll, for pushing to have the event here. It's the first public meeting we've had in this building since it was open. And it's definitely a nice facility here in Chesterfield County that we are happy to have you here. So.
Thank you, and I'll just add prestige to this august community, the CVTA. Other comments from other commissioners?
Mr. Chair, and I promise to be brief. I would like to say this, and as we move forward with CBTA, I am a 21-year veteran, and one of our mottos is we move with purpose. And so in moving with purpose, I understand during our formation of the CBTA, moving cautiously. I think that we have had many suggestions and motions on the floor today. I think that it is absolutely necessary for the whole board to meet with, maybe with Hampton Roads, with Northern Virginia. We have seen the results of their authority. We have opportunity for lessons learned from the formation of their authority. And I think that the vision that some of the suggestions, even from the finance committee, may not come today, but I think that we need to start planning today for what it looks like when it's time for us to be in place. And so that is, I'm not pushing the authority. However, I am indeed asking us to move with a purpose, to move with vision and inclusion. And so with that being said, I will not leave one transportation meeting without saying that I invite you to New Kent County to live racing. However, I invite you not to take I-64 East to get there because we are still in congestion mode, and especially now and throughout the rest of the year and on weekends. So that will be in the foremost of my head, even though I am a team player. And I want to see our projects, which is the formation of this body, see our projects that we could not fund without this committee to be funded. And so all of us can make sure that our constituents move in a safe manner and move with confidence that their tax dollars are that we are being good stewards of what is given to us. And so with that, I bid all of you a wonderful Memorial Day weekend, and thank you, sir, for your service.
Mr. Chairman, I hate to rush out because I've really enjoyed seeing each of you here today. I mean, this has been a real treat for me. In terms of, I have a medical appointment that I can't miss today, so that's the reason I'm rushing out. Otherwise, I would take the tour that's been graciously extended to us. But wherever y'all want to meet, Richmond, Convention Center, and Rock Oak, it's fine with me. Like I said, it's just great seeing all of you again, and all the best for Memorial Day. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make one last comment. This is Memorial Day weekend. We go out of here, all the work we're doing because of a lot of people who have sacrificed. I recommend everybody enjoy themselves, have a great weekend, but don't forget what it's all about. This is about people who are giving all who can be here.
Thank you for those kind words.
Sure.
Yep.
In the spirit of that, I would ask to honor all of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice so that we may have the freedoms that we have, that we take a moment of silence in their memory.
Let's take a moment of silence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Our next meeting is,
Could we also thank those who are here who have served? I think there's several.
You can have them stand, all those who have served, to honor them.
anybody would like to say? Appreciate your service. And also your next service for this august organization will be on June the 25th, okay? And we're informing you of the location. Thank you again, and those who like to take your trip, see this edifice, the rest of you, thank you. Have a